Hey everyone, Raelan here. I have a great interview for you today. I'm here with Dan Neuffer. Many of you are probably already familiar with who he is. For those of you who aren't, he is the creator of the ANS Rewire program and the author of CFS Unravelled. And he is just a wealth of information and has decades of experience and insight into recovering from conditions like ME/CFS and now long COVID and so forth. So today we are diving into a very specific topic, which is, does what triggered your current chronic health condition impact your recovery? Does it impact your prognosis? Does it impact your treatment plan? How much does it matter? Because so many of us who face these conditions had it set off by such a wide variety of things, and it can be really confusing to figure out what that means for us or if it means anything at all. So that is what we are going to dive into today. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me again.
It's lovely to connect with you, Raelan. I really appreciate the invite and the interesting question you're posing today.
Well, I know my viewers are always so appreciative to hear your insights and knowledge on these different topics with your many years of experience dealing with this. So I think a good place to start is just, why are we even tackling this topic? Why discuss the importance of triggers in conditions like ME/CFS? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess the first thought is, it's a question that's on people's minds, and if it's distracting us. It's distracting us from actually moving forward and doing what we need to. And I think it's a very reasonable question about these triggers. I think we all tend to feel that maybe we're different because the illness starts in so many different ways. And when we go to the doctors, they're like, I don't understand how this makes sense. You had this happen or some strange event. I mean, it's more obvious if someone had a virus. We talk about post-viral fatigue syndrome. But if someone had a car accident, then you go, well, I can't see any injuries now. Or if somebody lived in a house that was smelly and, I don't know, had mold, or if somebody got divorced, it often leads, especially when there's psychological triggers involved, it then often gets identified as being a mental illness, a psychological illness. And, I mean, we won't go into that today, but I just want to say we've just got to put that ridiculous notion just aside. Just because we can't easily see what's going on doesn't make it psychological. Important caveat for people just push that aside. But I think, I guess the next thing I would say is, does the trigger impact recovery potential for this group of illnesses? Ideally, when we ask these questions, what we should be referring to is research, right? And I don't really, this illness or this group of illnesses aren't really that well researched. And if we're talking about recovery potential, given that people are not necessarily using the best track, let's say, for their recovery, and it's often just looking at spontaneous recoveries, how can we assess if the trigger impacts the recovery potential? Like, you'd have to actually get everyone the right treatments in order for them to recover to be able to make such a judgment. So I think we're not necessarily going to get a good scientific answer anytime soon. But what we can do is we can still talk about it, and I can share some of my thoughts and experience. But I guess I'm going to pose something to you, Raelan. Let's say if you were triggered by X, Y, or Z, and my opinion, right? It's not scientific fact. And I share my opinion that hence you can't recover. Should you listen to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's really confusing because there's a lot of conflicting information out there and a lot of people saying different things. And, the reason I wanted to dive into this today is because so many people have such different triggers. I get a lot of people reaching out to me saying, I really love, the recovery interviews that you do, but I've never seen someone with my specific trigger. What does that mean for me? Can I recover? Should I have a different treatment path? And, I want to say to everyone, yes, you can recover. But of course, I don't know that. But
yeah, you don't know that. And I think that's a really pertinent point you're making. And so I guess my first answer is, if someone says to you, I can't recover because you've had this kind of trigger, then where's the scientific evidence for that?
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have scientific evidence for such an assertion, then really, let's throw that out. Because I can tell you that I've come across people who have complications and triggers that are unresolvable, and hence I would have suggested they cannot recover. I think I have a very firm basis for suggesting that, and I have been proven wrong. So the short answer, I guess, for this talk is that there is no evidence to suggest that people with specific triggers can't recover.
The reason that I feel so hopeful when people reach out to me and they say, I've had this specific thing that set mine off, can I recover? And of course, I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm not in any place to give medical advice. But just the reason that I'm hopeful that the trigger doesn't play such an important impact in recovery is because the more and more people I talk to who have fully recovered, the more I'm seeing patterns. And again, this is just anecdotal. It's not research by any stretch of the imagination, but it is still reason to be hopeful, because I will see people that have had all sorts of varied triggers for their condition, whether it be viral, stress related, overtraining, sports training, all sorts of different things. And they've all used the same approach for recovery, and it's been successful. So to me, that suggests that the healing path is the important part, as opposed to what set off these issues in the first place. Mm-hmm. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I certainly think I like the healing path, and the healing path has to be specific to the person. I mean, the triggers are important and they need to be considered. But I think it's important not to exclude the possibility of recovery because you have X, Y, Z trigger. I mean, I've spoken and seen thousands of people who've been triggered by different things. And I have seen countless people recover. And nothing obvious has come to mind where I've gone, oh, clearly the people with this kind of thing can't recover, right? But I think there are reasons why we may have difficulties recovering, depending on a specific trigger. So I think we should delve into some of those specifics. I might launch into that sort of right away. I mean, let's have a look at it. Let's say somebody gets ill and their trigger is an infection, like a parasitic infection. And then on an ongoing basis, they still have this parasitic infection. So if they don't resolve this infection, and obviously the body has to be a part of that, and when we're in a state of dysfunction, it often becomes difficult, right? So it's a bit of a merry-go-round. Yes, the dysfunction causes the body to misbehave, and that misbehavior causes the infection not to resolve. Yeah, so it's a bit of a cycle. But nonetheless, taking steps to resolve that parasitic infection, let's say, is obviously going to be an important step for that person to recover. Does it mean that they can't recover? Well, look, I mean, let's talk about Lyme, for instance, as an example. I've seen people who have Lyme, and it's then called chronic Lyme, but I would say it's CFS with a twist of Lyme, if you like. Then really what we're looking at here is I've seen people who've had all these treatments and all these antibiotics, and they haven't recovered. And then they go on a more multilateral, complex recovery journey that involves brain training components, and they make a full recovery, and they're fine. And sometimes they still test positive for Lyme, even though they're completely healthy. So it's interesting. I've seen other people who've had Lyme who then had specific treatments for the Lyme, and those treatments really reduced their symptoms a lot and then allowed them to make progress with all the other recovery strategies. So does it stop you from recovering? I would say no, but it can really help to address a trigger. And it's like that with all the triggers. All right. So if you've got a tooth infection that's simmering, well, it's going to impact you. Yeah. You've got to get that treated. It's the same with other viral infections. So many of us feel our illness starts with a viral infection. Sure, in many cases that's the case. Obviously, in the moment it's very topical with the pandemic. But in many cases, I'm unconvinced that there's a virus. We have viral symptoms, but not necessarily a virus. Yes, because viral symptoms are predominantly caused by the immune system, the nervous system. And if you look at it, we keep getting those often when we're sick, like all the time when we have flare-ups, yes? But when I ask people about this, they'll often tell me how they were run down for months, sometimes years, leading up to this viral onset. Yeah, so even if they did get the virus, was it the virus that made them sick, or did they become sick from the virus because they were already in a state of dysfunction? It gets quite complicated, doesn't it, Raelan?
It does. It definitely does. And one of the things that I get a sense from a lot of the questions that I get that I was excited to ask you about today, since you have such extensive experience in working with people with this, is the main feeling I get is people want to know, am I more likely to recover if I'm in this group or this group? Like, are viral infections more likely to have a full recovery, or and so forth? Are there certain groups where it's going to be a lot harder for them because it had a different type of, trigger that set it all off? So what has been your experience, or what have you witnessed around that?
Yes, that's a really good question. I mean, look, I'll just touch on this viral question very quickly on this, in light of your question here, and say, I don't think anything should ever be oversimplified. This is very complex. With the pandemic, we're now getting a lot of attention on this and having people look at it very specifically in very great detail about what's going on in the body. I'm uncertain if what they're discovering is necessarily that different than what has happened with other viral onsets or dysfunctions. I think there may be some things, especially around the blood clotting and things like that. So there may be additional complications. But yeah, I think there's a lot of science to be done. In my experience with viral onsets, I have not found this group of people to have particular less success with recovery or more complications. What I would say is some people who've had very severe treatment for infections, and particularly in treatments that involve a lot of antibiotics, they have a lot more work to do around restoring their gut health. And that can sometimes be a bit of a stumbling block. And so really working with a functional medicine or integrative doctor and getting help seems to be quite important. So there's all these physical triggers. One that has come up is concussion, that I wonder about because I haven't had that much experience with it. I think some people certainly struggle because maybe there is something in addition going on with when people have concussion, and that may need to be addressed. But again, how much research and evidence do we have for this? And I think it's, you can go in a forum and maybe find a lot of people who have a particular trigger, see that they've struggled to recover. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't recover, because no matter what the trigger is, if you look hard enough, you're going to find someone who recovered, right? I guess one other group that one needs to be spoken about is where there's psychological triggers. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't recover. Does the trigger impact your ability to recover? I would say no, but I would say that it needs to be addressed. The trigger, whatever the trigger is, it needs to be resolved. And I think that is really key. So when people have trauma, abuse, or any other sort of psychological complication or mental health issue, I think it's really important that that is addressed as part of their recovery strategy. And so whilst it doesn't necessarily stop them from recovering, it can make it more difficult until it's resolved.
So it sounds like it all matters. We should pay attention to all of it. None of it is preventing the possibility of recovery. So all the factors should be weighed in and, treated accordingly, but there's no category you've come across like, oh, people with this trigger, there's no hope for them.
No, I haven't. And perhaps I thought I might intellectually or, from a logical point of view. It hasn't been my experience. I have seen people recover from so many different triggers. It's countless triggers. And like I said, in all my experience, I haven't come like, oh, there's this group of people who just can't recover. It hasn't been my experience. I certainly see certain groups of people struggle. People with anxiety issues will often struggle to recover. But it doesn't mean that you can't recover. Yeah. So it's just really, really key that we get help to reduce things. And sometimes we go, oh, I used the word earlier, you have to resolve these issues like trauma, anxiety, or any other mental health issue. And then people go, oh, that's so hard. I've been trying to do that for years and I can't do it. And I'm like, well, hang on a sec. Obviously, we need to keep going and maybe change our approach. But I think the thing to realize too is that we don't actually necessarily have to fix it perfectly with all the triggers. Let's say even if you have gut dysbiosis or you have or Lyme, right? Where I've said earlier, people with Lyme, they'd had all the treatments, the Lyme didn't go away. Then they did all these other multilateral recovery treatments and they recovered, and the line was apparently still there. So the point is, we don't necessarily have to fix the trigger, but we need to do it enough so that we can recover. And if your trigger, whether it be a parasitic infection or whether it be a psychological issue, if you can just do enough to make progress, that's good. That's all you need to do. You don't need to fully recover. You need to just make progress. Yes? And then as your body keeps healing, the original triggers and the issues that you have can often resolve by themselves, including for mental health issues. You'd be surprised to how much your mental health changes when you actually have a good night's sleep for more than one night in a row. And your ability for your gut to normalize as your ANS normalizes is enhanced. So, yeah, I think focus on progress. I think lose the idea that you can't recover. And if someone tells you that you can't, make it your mission to prove them wrong.
Another question that comes out of all of this, I imagine you hear a lot as well, is, okay, you know what, because of my trigger, because of my certain situation, I have these specific symptoms. And I have this one symptom that I haven't seen anybody else who recovers has. So what about when it comes to symptoms? Is that something that people can look at to gauge their recovery potential? Or what's your experience been with that?
Not at all. Not at all. People have such a wide range of symptoms, and so many of the symptoms are really, really common and just don't get talked about. It's actually really common that I get people who say, oh, I've got this symptom, and have you had anyone else hear it? And I'm like, yeah, hundreds. I've heard hundreds of people mention this symptom. Oh, but I've been on all the forums, I haven't seen it. I'm like, literally, I can think of one case where I had somebody say they had these symptoms that I haven't heard before or haven't heard with other people who recovered. And I actually questioned whether they had CFS. And that's actually one I can think of in the last 5 years, let's say.
It's interesting because I think when we're going through it, it feels like our experience is really wild and crazy and unique, and that no one else could be going through that specific thing. Because of course, until you face this, you don't know about other people who have this. You have no idea what it can look like. And I thought that with my journey, and it just felt just so bizarre. And my symptoms were all over the place. And my journey was just, my recovery was just, felt like it was just all over the map. And then, you know, I wrote a book about it and started sharing my story. And so many people contact me and say, it's like I was reading my own words, like word for word, your story is my story. So it can feel that way. It can feel like no one has got this specific thing going on. Who has recovered? Who's got what I have? But there's probably tons. They just might not have written a book about it that you've read. So I think it's just good to know that we're really not as alone in this as we think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unique symptoms virtually don't happen. Very, very rarely.
Well, thank you so much. I know that for me, this has provided a lot of clarity and reassurance, and hopefully for people watching, they've found this helpful. I think one of the biggest things we can do for people with these sorts of interviews and videos is just to get more information out there and share more experiences of other people. And I think sometimes we just need our anxiety calmed down a little bit because it's scary and it's overwhelming. So just to know that, okay, it's okay. You know, I can do this. It is, other people have done it. It's going to be okay.
Absolutely. And look, one last thing I want to say, Raelan, is I think I would be different. So, you know, when people are listening to this and they're maybe feeling awkward because they're saying, oh yeah, I keep getting worried about the trigger and this or the symptoms, that maybe I'm different. We all feel like we're probably different. We all feel, not all, but most of us think we're different or we're broken. And it's not until we sort of meet other people that we get that sense of validation. Obviously, when you're having difficulty with recovering, it can be quite natural to go, maybe I can't because something else is going on with me, or there's a specific trigger or something like that. So I'm trying to reassure people that my experience doesn't really support these kind of notions. We do need to do some work with existing ongoing triggers, but I don't think anyone can be excluded. And look, and even if there was such an experience by somebody who tells you that, unless you've got hardcore scientific research that absolutely proves this, I would not take it on board.
Well, I very much appreciate, again, you taking the time to chat. People aren't aware, as we just wrap up, it would be great if you could just share a little bit about, you know, your program, the support that you offer, and so forth.
The ANS Rewire program is the main education product that people take advantage of. There's also the book CFS Unravelled, which can be a good starting point. I think the key thing is with anything you do is check if it's right for you. Don't just launch into it. I say to people, watch the 4 intro lessons, see how the program's delivered, see if the theory and explanation and approach resonates with you. If it's not for you, find something else. But if it really resonates with you, go for it. If you still have questions or you're not 100% sure, have a look at reading the book. People are always welcome to check it out, and I hope it supports as many people as possible.
Thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to do this today. I really appreciate this. I know that people really value these chats, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me back.
And as always, Dan and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have in the video comments, so look forward to keeping the conversation going there. And if you enjoyed this video, I also have lots of other expert interviews on this channel for people talking about all angles of recovery from conditions like ME/CFS, so I'll link that up there as well. If you haven't subscribed already yet, I invite you to consider doing so, because I've got a lot of really great stuff coming up over the next couple of months, and you're not going to want to miss it. So thank you again, Dan. Thank you to everyone who is watching, and I'll see you in the next video.